We won't end up in a 15-minute city, shuffling around shitcoins.
We'll be shitcoin shufflers in a 15 minute zone. Yeah, there's basically, I don't think it'll work. I mean, I think Martin Armstrong had some interesting insights on the history of.
Hey guys, a shortish one today as filmmaker James Patrick is traveling at the moment in Hungary, I believe. But I've got him here to talk about his new film about CBDC. And I caught some of the film already. The visuals are luscious and the sound, and it's got Professor Werner and it's got Armstrong himself of the predicting computer. But anyway, James, great to see you. You're there in your hotel room.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. And I'm conscious of our time today. We'll get straight into it. So I saw a little of the movie. It's superb. And I told people during the mass medication around a year or two ago, when they were asking me to cover the impacts of said medication, I said, look, it's kind of yesterday's war. And tomorrow's war is what you need to be focusing on. And the big thing coming in the future was, well, it was the UN Pact for the Future and some of the other stuff. But majorly the CBDC, because in my view, if they get the CBDC, we're kind of hosed. So I'm a pretty positive guy. I think there's a lot of awakening. I was able to give positive message at my talks in the UK, elsewhere. But I kind of have one negative thing. If they get the CBDC, we're in serious trouble. What do you reckon?
Yeah, so I guess in the COVID thing, they started doing all these vaccine passports, and there was a lot of weird stuff where they were saying you couldn't go out of your area, restricting people's movements, but they couldn't do that without the CBDC. So it seems like there's a plan to sort of put in this digital money, and these oligarchs think they can just kind of trap us with them. I don't think it'll work. I think they'll probably get it to some extent, but it will lead to sort of black markets. The economy seizing up a bit. You'll have an official market and unofficial markets, and it'll lead to basically poverty and in a pretty crappy situation. So I think it's important that people get familiarized with some of the basic points, so we can run down a few of the points of basically what CBDCs are, the relationship with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, the necessity of having digital IDs to make them work, and this big kind of parallel push to put in digital ID systems worldwide. And then also this broader objective of tokenizing, creating basically ID tags, indelible, unforgeable ID tags for every person, object, and asset worldwide in a sort of global universal ledger, which is basically the foundation of a world government of some kind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we might start, there's quite a bit in there, but the Bitcoin and the origins of Bitcoin, we might do a few minutes on that. I was delighted to see that in the movie because at the Brownstone Institute conference, I think last year I was in Spain, I met a guy there who I suspect is intelligence. He had that whole kind of feel, and he talked about, no question, Bitcoin came essentially from agencies. So maybe we'll talk a bit about that.
I agree with that too. Yeah, I mean, I was an early adopter of Bitcoin, was very excited about it as a way out of the bankers' clutches. But if you really look critically at it and at a higher level, 50,000 feet high level, you can see that Bitcoin really invented blockchain and invented this decentralized ledger technology, and created digital scarcity. So it enabled the currency to work, to be in to lay the foundation for a digital currency, but it also laid the foundation. I mean, it really paved the way for the cashless society, which we've known these guys have been kind of hammering at for some time, or some long-term objective of theirs. So I think that should give us some pause. And then there's also a lot of intelligence agencies clues that NSA or CIA invented it, or at least launched the program, and then probably at the behest of the central bankers. I mean, the spy agencies are kind of the play toy of Wall Street, or the financial interests. So like the first CIA director was Donovan. He was like a Rockefeller attorney. So just because you see spy agencies doing things in the world or in areas, it doesn't they're not the maybe the brain behind it per se. They're more the operational agents, executing certain things. But anyway, yeah, I do suspect that the central bankers essentially got NSA or something to create Bitcoin to then p- test and prototype the technology, market it as cool. And then there was this kind of bubbling crypto land space. I went to tons of these conferences, and then that sort of they attracted a lot of really talented programmers into the space, luring them with all the money to be made in the rise of Bitcoin price. And still, I mean, I think people are being lured into where people are kind of being gulled into. Don't get me wrong, I think Bitcoin's probably a good investment until like maybe a great taking sort of collapse occurs. Then I think it probably would go down quite a lot with the markets, because it has been kind of tracing the markets and then jumping
Yeah.
up above it, and then tracing the markets, then doing these jumps above. But if we do see a general huge collapse, I do think Bitcoin would probably fall down quite a bit with it. But so yeah, in general, I think people are being gulled through the lure of all this financial gain into using Bitcoin and other sort of blockchain digital money stuff, getting from just luring people into it. If there wasn't, if they just came out with CBDCs and Bitcoin never happened, um, I think it would have been really harder for them to program all this stuff just right out of the BIS, and then also would have been maybe impossible to get people to accept it. So by luring people into it through the lure of financial gain, plus this libertarian wet dream thing in Bitcoin. It's like in Satoshi's papers, he does reference a lot of Austrian economics and Ludwig von Mises and Rothbard and stuff like that. So it's possible some of the programmers they hired were into Austrian economics. And I do know a lot of spies that talk libertarian and survivalist, but then they go and kill people for the government. And you're like, where do you reconcile this worldview of
Well,
yours?
there's always the risk of being paranoid, but to be honest, since 2020, the last few years, the paranoia all turned out to be completely valid or validated. So yeah, these people, call them who you are, and I know there's certain tribes and certain groups way up there who are orchestrating this, and we know a lot of the ones that are visible, like Club of Rome and Rockefeller and the UN and all that kind of thing, and Council Foreign Relations. But above that, there's a lot of shady characters, but they are smart, and they will be smart enough to sell you what you desire in order to undermine you and topple you. So it fits for me logically, and the fact that the inventor was a secret person that no one knows who he is. It's like, it does stink of a bit of an op, right? I mean, it does. But you know what? We'll move on. Digital ID is one that makes my blood run cold. And when I found out in 2020, it was around May, and I was hoping that the whole COVID flu nonsense was just stupidity and profiteering. But by late April and May, people were sending me stuff I'd never seen before, like WEF. But also they were sending me Common Pass, set up by Gates and Rockefeller in mid 2019. And you can see all the searches around it in the Google record, where like Switzerland and East Coast. And then the searches dropped. And then in January, February 2020, the searches shot up again. A universal pass for vaccine and health, and a million other things. And then I realized, oh, damn it. If they get a universal ID, that's what they need for the future tyranny. I mean, that is the mecca. So maybe we talk a bit about that global ID and Blair. Remember Blair tried to ram it in 10 years ago, and the people got suspicious and rejected it. Blair, of course, is I don't know, one of the great Satans, clearly. So yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, Bush Jr. first pushed it in 2001, the real ID in the US. It didn't take off. It's really just coming into effect 2025 now. So,
Mm.
but yeah, this push for a digital ID, an indelible digital ID, um, is critical to make CBDCs work. So you can biometrically verify a person and then link it to their digital wallet. and then have the wallet not work unless it's linked to the digital ID. Did I lose you there? Are you all right?
Oh no, it's fine. I'm here absolutely. You're just featuring. You're the main feature here on the screen. But yeah, the digital ID. I've been telling people now for around a year. Um, that fundamental crucial thing. The digital ID is the platform or the base on which they will build the technocracy and, to be quite frank, dystopia. Huge efforts have gone in. They've failed many times, like you mentioned, with Bush and also with Blair and all the droogs, the usual characters. How are they doing right now? Just rough and tough. They're steadily inching it forward with BS narratives to fool the puppeticians, really.
Yeah, I mean, they're really pushing for every country in the world to adopt a digital ID, to add biometrics, to basically verify the physical person and then link it to this digital ID again with the kind of ideally with a kind of a hashed ID number, which is basically, if I have an ID number, it's like I'll give you an example, like a barcode on a can of Coke or something will say it's this kind of can of Coke. Then they had RFID tags, which would say it's this particular can of Coke made in this factory and bought by this person. And then the next thing would be a sort of encrypted hash that would say it's this can of Coke, but no one can spoof or forge that ID number. It's kept on an indelible blockchain kind of ledger. It didn't have to be necessarily a blockchain, which is kind of a cumbersome technology. But the idea is basically you create a digital uniqueness that cannot be forged or defrauded. And that way, everyone's like a pig in a cage. I mean, you cannot fake these things. You can't spoof these things. There's no room for fraud or like they can 100% ID someone and they walk through this door at that time down this street, bought this thing. I mean, you're really talking about a sort of total information awareness dystopia. So, and anyway, so in the third world, they're pushing this a lot, and they're kind of Gates and all these mealy mouth guys are saying, "Oh, well, we're doing it for the Africans to lift them out of poverty." And in 2016, they did this really ambitious project in India called Aadhaar, where they launched this massive, I think it's like over 1 billion people in India. They biometrically verified them with several different means gradually. Uh, and then, imagine trying to ID everybody in India with a biometric thing. And then they like, I think since 2015, half the starvation deaths were attributed to lack of having a functional Aadhaar ID, because then they'd link all the welfare doles or grain doles. India is quite socialist, so they'd have lots of like food doles, and so they would. This is this common theme too, is linking digital IDs with like welfare. Like these Sam Altman, who has OpenAI Chat GPT, owner of Chat GPT, he launched this creepy thing called WorldCoin, where it was this like metal orb. You'd like stare into it and it'd scan your iris. And then you get a shit coin in exchange for, you get some, or sometimes they give you some shit coins if you stared into the ball. And then like but he said in an interview, he's like, "Oh, I really felt like the reason why I wanted to do this project was to create a universal welfare program." So this idea of like linking the global digital ubiquitous ID and then gulling the sheep into it with some shit coins in the welfare, you know, it's creepy. And I remember when the whole COVID thing started, there was one creepy Microsoft patent that said they were like, "Oh, well, a worker will do a task, it'll be registered in the cloud, and then they're paid their own particular slave coins for the work that they complete." So this is the
It
kind of vision that they're thinking up here. But they're saying it's to help the poor, bank the unbanked, financial inclusion, the ID 2020, this big program that Gates funds via UN. They say bridge the identity gap. Oh, 2 billion people don't have a biometric ID, so there we need to bridge this equity identity gap. I mean, if you believe this shit, you're just like, it's
it's like everything during the COVID flu. Like self-evidently nonsense, and clearly, like, it's absolute fraud. I mean, it is frustrating to the likes of us or the myriad other people who have just realized what's going on over the past few years and not longer. It's so ridiculous, everything they say. It's so corny that even a normal person in a corporate work setting would immediately see the scam if it came from management. In their normal environment of the politics of the office, when managers start saying, oh, we want XYZ for the employees, they know they're being screwed, right? But when it involves people way up at the top, like all of human history, where the bad guys ended up getting, the normie, of course, or the NPC, just thinks, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, because they've been programmed for decades to believe that anything bad coming from the top is, quote, a conspiracy theory. It's so frustrating. The movie covers, though, that digital ID excellently, and of course, the ID 2020. What would, if we parse it out, what's the next kind of key step or theme in the movie, which everyone should go to the link below, by the way. It puts everything together so beautifully.
You mean the tokenization issue, or?
Oh yeah, the token. I heard about this a while back, and I thought, come on, tokenize every bit of nature and every person's possession.
Yeah,
But
so
then,
I guess yeah, so one thing, so if Bitcoin was a way to bring us to the cashless society, when the NFT thing came out, it's sort of, then we have the parallel digital ID thing, which is similar technologies of tokenizing the person, right? But then
mm,
then when they came out with this NFT thing like 4 years ago, there was this big hot rage on NFTs. And I was thinking, I was like, this is really like creating an ID tag for a physical object. You're tagging a piece of art or some physical thing, and that has direct application to really the Internet of Bodies, Internet of Things. There's this new trend called Internet of Things, where you basically tag everything in the world and then have it all on a ledger so you can track everything. And then there's Internet of Bodies, which is really kind of implanting sensors in the bodies of everyone and have that on a live feed to some central servers and
mm,
things. Harari's kind of been Sapiens guy has been seen fantasizing about that on
right.
interviews. But there's basically then there's this whole thing of like, okay, well, Fink has talked a lot about this. That let's create a universal ledger of all the world's assets, and if you could have some basically the only reason to have ledgers of assets or traditionally, historically, governments have done that right before they had massive taxation programs, where they say like, okay, well, we want to do censuses. We want to do or censuses have always been done before taxation programs, but these days the tax systems are so much more pervasive and invasive that really they want to know all your assets. They don't just want to know who is there. They want to know who's there and every damn thing you own, and they want it all on a big ledger, and so they can steal some of it. And then like EU is now pushing some asset registry thing in EU. Why would they want to do that unless they plan to steal some of it? So, and then the next thing is like this universal ledger. Think of BlackRock's been talking about that will have this general ledger of all the world's assets, and every person will have every asset will have a QSIP, which is like an ID number. Every person will have an ID tag, and that every trade will be recorded permanently. There'll be no chance of fraud in the financial markets, like if you believe that. And then, um, and then so the basically, I mean, the definition, one of the core definitions of a government is the right to tax. So when I start hearing these things about universal ledgers, all the world's assets, that's sort of that's laying the foundations for a world government. And but well, one big thing I've kind of realized through the course of making this film is that there's, for example, with this public-private partnership model going forward, we're basically seeing the erection of a world government, but through a sort of public-private partnership way that,
Mm,
and we saw this a lot in COVID too. There was a lot of crimes committed or constitutional violations committed, but they sort of parceled up the tasks between different organizations so that they could skirt the laws of it. So the government never made the pharmaceutical companies that made the vaccines never made any medical claims. about them being efficacious, but this White House did, and the government did, the media made the claims, and the companies stayed quiet. And then when it came to censorship, the private company censored the people, the government never did. So the government, you have First Amendment rights to not be silenced by the government, but Facebook can censor you, and these other private platforms can with the terms of service. Now we're seeing the same things happening in the digital ID area, where there are constitutional protections on privacy. There are constitutional protections on financial privacy, personal privacy. But so now what they're doing with Gates and Rockefeller Foundations have made these standardization protocols for digital IDs to be recorded and stored and accessed by public and private sector entities. So it's not like the government is managing the digital ID. It's like a cloud-based, decentralized, public-private database that can be accessed by any entity with the right credentials. So you go to your doctor and you might give him permission to access these decentralized health records, or some public agency has the right to access these records if they have a reason. So you're sort of living in this big corporate public-private Borg blob that anything can access, and they can sort of skirt all these protections we have against these things.
Yeah, it's very clever, and it's what you would expect from these denizens, of course. But like the banks also have been used. It figures quite well in the movie. The banks are used on the basis of your safety and fraud, and trafficking and all this stuff, all the lovely stories, fairy stories. But the banks are enabled to mess with you, where the government with the constitution might not really be allowed to without a warrant. I thought that was really important. This has been happening for a long time, where the government can't come after you and harass you without a warrant and due process of law. But hey presto, the banks have been doing it on their behalf, and they're kind of allowed to, right? Because it's private business. They're entitled to that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that they can skirt these laws by making it sort of private user agreements, and it's a public-private partnership. I mean, Gates and these guys are very big on these public-private partnerships, so they can get the benefits of both worlds and not the legal restrictions of either one.
Absolutely. Um, we might go through then the future and what's likely to happen. So I know this is always difficult, in fairness, James, but you did express a positivity at the start, and a lot of people who I highly respect around the world, like Dr. Jakob Nordengord and many more, are expressing a positivity that this is getting out, that there's a rise in awareness, and that there are many things that will dictate that this won't work out in the end for the bad guys. Now, I'm sure the listeners would love to hear a bit of positivity in this Christmas season. So what do you reckon are the positive points that it probably won't? We won't end up in a 15-minute city, shuffling around shitcoins.
We'll be shitcoin shufflers in the 15-minute zone. Yeah, there's basically, I don't think it'll work. I mean, I think Martin Armstrong had some interesting insights on the history of in the 1830s and the 1930s, the U.S. government sort of seized up the money and created financial problems in the U.S. And as a result, cities and provinces and private companies started issuing their own private monies or local monies to sort of fill in the gap because there wasn't enough of the federal money. So
Mm.
I think that if they really bum rush the CBDC thing and get this whole thing into place, it won't really like pan out that smoothly. I mean, the vision is so dark and so kooky that there will necessarily be a huge black market. I mean, it could kind of crash the markets and we have real chaos, and the women become whores and everyone becomes a pauper and everyone's just kind of selling themselves on the streets. But I mean, like, but there'll still be a bustling black market. Like, people will need to eat and function, and I don't know. It could get a little Mad Maxy here and there, but I but I just think the human spirit of trading will prevail, and people want to have a better life and stuff. And I just don't know. The plans seem so kooky. I'm also doing this film on the Great Taking issue,
Mm.
and it does seem like some of the visions they're talking about really involve a much poorer world. Like there's a C20, C30 initiative where they have all these mayors signing these things saying people only have three pairs of clothes and one 1,500-mile trip every 3 years, and they'll only be in their 15-minute zone, no dairy or cows. So that basically, it seems like they're anticipating some sort of a collapse, and then a lower standard of living, like a more feudal kind of peasant environment, and then they can go on these kind of doles and CBDCs. I'm getting the sense that that's where this is going.
The vision is for UBI, or Universal Basic Income, 15-minute cities, almost no travel, by exception to be able to move around, with your digital ID and everywhere you go tracked. They've been quite clear on what they desire. I mean, it is technically written in publications, like Agenda 2030 and all. It's written in lovely saving granny language, but the vision is truly dystopian and horrifying to the main body of the people, of the citizens. It's just they don't really know it yet. But I guess when the business end of their blunt weapons begins to impose upon people, then you'll get a pushback. I guess my biggest concern was that by the time the masses of people realize how their futures are being destroyed, and their children and grandchildren, it's a big deal. By the time they actually realize it, God bless them, it may be very difficult to fight back. I guess that's my concern. The time for a mass awakening is in the coming few years. It's too late to be when you're on the other side of universal ID and CBDC. Any revolution will be nipped in the bud. One thing, James, I just mentioned, I saw a couple of years ago, and I tried to tell everyone I could get to. In China, during the COVID flu nonsense, there was a problem, and this was after COVID flu kind of rolled over, in China, and they let the thing go. There was a group of businessmen who had their accounts frozen. And in China, traditionally, you do allow a little freedom to people. If they have a problem with a private business, they're allowed go on a Saturday morning outside that physical business and hold placards, once they don't cause trouble, of course. And a bunch of businessmen who had their accounts frozen, and it was covered even in mainstream, I think, they all agreed on Friday or Thursday or Friday that they go up on Saturday to the nearby town and they'd stand outside in their silent protest, which they're allowed to do. But on Friday night, all their COVID passes went red and they couldn't move. So, that would be my main concern, that a system where you begin to get together with people to push back and you can't even get going.
Yeah. No, I mean that's certainly a concern. I just feel like the plan is too bombastic to work. I mean, it's like other pushes towards total domination, or I mean, it's like Israel now attacking six countries at the same time. Like, is that going to work out well? Like, it's just these really insane, bombastic plans where you're like, we're just going to take over all this stuff. Is that really going to pan out the way they think it's going to pan out? Are they going to get? I think they'll get some wins in some areas and stuff, but I can't see this working across a place like Africa or like South Asia. I mean, there's just certain areas I just don't think. Europe seems a little screwed to me because people are so docile. I don't
It's
think
a
US is
problem.
going to fly. US is not going to fly a CBDC.
Mm.
They're openly they're kind of playing a double game in the US. They're saying, I think they know. Well, another point I'll mention is that, like, so in the US, for example, there really are some constitutional barriers to doing this. So they've
Mm.
taken the approach to simply not do it there, but to really go the stablecoin bank issue route. So you can get the same effect of a CBDC with the existing know your customer, any money laundering, AML, KYC regulations, and increasing private bank surveillance. So basically, the government deputizes the banks to monitor the customers, and then mandates that they report to the IRS or the authorities on the activities of the customer. So again, this is one of these areas where the government isn't allowed to do that, but they deputize the private companies to do the surveillance for them and mandate them to report back to them, which I think is constitutionally shaky, but it hasn't been really fought in the 60s. JFK passed the Bank Secrecy Act, fucker. And then they did this. Now we have this huge, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And now we got this huge financial surveillance machine. But again, they're going to do these kind of switch the accounts with dollar derivative stablecoin, like Wells Fargo dollar derivative token or Bank of America dollar token. And then those can be turned off and controlled by the private bank, kind of at the government's behest through this regulation. So you end up getting something similar to a CBDC model. But I don't think that will fly across the US for sure. There's going to be areas where that is not done, and we're probably going to see some kind of potentially regionalization in the US. But Europe, I think it may fly at least for some time, and then. But again, the vision of the whole world integrated thing. I'm skeptical. I don't think people need to be as afraid of these things as they are, and I do think that there's the mainstream propaganda, and then it's like they view the propaganda thing as some big pie chart with these different demographics, and they feed the different pigeons different sort of talking points. And so in the awake section of conservative people in the West, they feed them a sort of fear narrative that there's this inevitability of the tyrannical state coming down and killing us all. So it's like the CBDC, a lot of the discussion of that falls in that category of like, oh, we're all going to get locked up like pigs and they're just going to like prod us every day, So I don't think that they're going to achieve, they're kind of psyoping people into submitting to it by scaring them, with that. And there's a basis to the fear mongering, but it's not as achievable, or like it's not going to be that it's easy road to achieve that.
Yeah, and there's the lovely demotivating element. So if they dog whistle to the conservative and the libertarian and freedom types in the way that you describe, on the one hand, yes, it's motivating them to speak up and to fight back, but it's also demotivating with a sense of doom, which I see a lot sometimes coming from followers. And I always say, you got to be stoical. If we all end up in the gulag, Solzhenitsyn style, sharing the last cigarette butt, so be it. Once we did what we could to oppose it, you've got to accept fate if it occurs. So I'm big on stoicism for all the awake. They need it. But I see exactly what you're saying. Segmented propaganda, stroking and fluffing, if you will, the left-leaning kind of liberals and the university professors, and getting them on board to support this nonsense, and then kind of aggravating and hornets nesting the libertarians to keep them in disarray and fear. These are truly evil people. That's the point we might finish on. What do you think, in a more biblical or philosophical sense, of all the characters we're aware of, and certain religions and tribes that are very pivotal in a lot of these efforts to undermine our freedom and the world? What do you think of their essential nature? Is evil a fair word to use these days?
Yeah, I think there's an evilness to these things. But it's like, yeah, it's just kind of like these biblical style catastrophes and cataclysms. I mean, there's sort of this calls for a world war, and this sort of
Well, I guess, yeah, that sometimes I use the E word, and some people say it's a bit over the top. But I'm an atheist, actually. I don't have any. I'm more the hardcore science data person. It's my nature. But often in flights of fancy, I kind of instinctively portray the people that I'm researching and the people up the top that are truly driving this. I instinctively have come to see them as kind of genuinely evil without even getting into spiritual beings. Good old-fashioned, truly evil, utterly self-centered, utterly only interested in money and power over their fellow species. Stuff that disgusts me. evil. That's how I see them.
Yeah, I think we don't have an elite that is really pushing like noble qualities or like holding a high example of civilization. It does seem very destructive and apocalyptic in its sort of focus. That is I do think so. I don't know. That's why I'm once I get through once I get through these last few depressing movies, I'm really gonna start. I really wanted to start getting into the Neoplatonic literature and really focus on these nobility concepts of like nobility and what's good and what's beautiful. I mean, I really think we need to not only focus on all the evil shit these people are doing, but really sort of work on an example of high ideals and noble thoughts, not in some naive like utopic sense, but just in a sense of like what's good and beautiful and then provide an alternative example. I do think the Western civilization or this culture has deteriorated into materialistic pool of dog doo and just this like race for money and power and domination with which is like it's depraved, you know. I mean, look at art, look at architecture. I mean, look at it's deteriorated into this like minimalistic, just noisy mess. You know, I hate going to modern art galleries. They're just like it's like garbage. You know,
It's
it's
dog shit. I mean,
it's
I
dog
noticed
shit.
this architecture and art. I noticed that decades ago, and I presumed it was just a natural decline of civilization and materialism. Now, in the last 5 years, with a lot of research, I realized a lot of that was orchestrated
Yeah,
by
like
specific groups and people,
From World
funded.
War One.
Yeah,
Yeah, from World War One onward. So that was
yeah.
World
So
War One
there,
was really the decline of the monarchies, and then and the promotion of this modern state and the taxation, and then this atonal music and art, and then so I really think we need to kind of not just focus on all the evil shit. We should hold these people accountable and try and execute them, but we need to also get build a more beautiful world with more noble people. So I think it starts with each one of us to look inside and become a better person and more cultured and more have better manners and higher ideals and goals. And then it's going to be easier to sort of hold all these people accountable and get people to I mean, you know, and also maybe the last thing I'll say is like always here in the US, everyone's like Constitution, we need to have but I mean, it's like you can have the best constitution in the world, but you still need to have people that will follow it, you know? So if
and
you just have a
defend it.
bunch of shitty people, even if you have the best laws, they're not going to follow them or hold the bad guys accountable. So I think it's really important that we focus on these principles of like personal integrity, morality, the people like they'll do the right thing when they're put to the test.
Well, absolutely. And great words to wrap it up. And I think it was Marcus Aurelius who said something along the lines of do the right thing, there is nothing else. So I'm big into the Stoics in the last few years for pretty much the reasons you say. And I think that the people who are going to counter this, and it is a growing group on a positive note, they need to develop a huge amount of mental strength and resilience. So I think we need to work on that area. And that's my next focus in the next 6 months for my part is I'm going to do mini workshops and I'm going to do various products on the best of CBT, cognitive therapy, stoicism, some other technologies, the best ways that people can get tools to increase their resilience and mental strength and stoicism. Because, as you said, there's probably going to be some fireworks in the coming years, even if the bad guys don't particularly win per se. It could get pretty bumpy, and we need to be ready for that, right?
Yeah, and we will be. We will be. Okay.
Here, here. Thanks so much, James, and we'll circle back and see how things are going in a while.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me, Ivor.
Good man. And the links, of course, are down below. I'll probably put it on the screen as well. Well, what's the website?
CBDC, it's cbdctheendofmoney.com.
CBDC, theendofmoney.com, all one stream. got it. And for a few bucks there, or there's probably other offers, you can watch this superb movie. So, and share. That's what I'd ask people. Absolutely enjoy it, but share as well. Get the message out, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Ivor. Yeah. I think
Thanks,
it's just
James.
an email capture from now on. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay.
Okie
Thank
doke.
you. Have a good day. Huh?
That'll do it, folks. The link is down below to the fantastic new movie. It's really a work of art, I think, and it brings you through everything, including some hope for the future. So, till next time, bye now.